Concord's spire was a cathedral of glass threaded with starlight, anchored where 5 trade lanes crossed like braided rivers. Its ribs were transparent, its arteries crowded with delegates and the small courtesies that keep civilizations from knifing each other in the dark. Naomi Park walked its main transept with the steady gait of someone who had learned to be underestimated. American by birth, Terran by duty. She wore a black suit that didn't try to compete with the peacocks of the galaxy. No plumes, no epaulets, no medals. A notebook in one pocket, a mended briefcase in the other. If anyone looked twice, it was to study her eyes, calm, almost teacherly, and then to forget the man who walked a pace behind her. He was short, a little stooped, gray at the temples, wire-rimmed glasses that caught the corridor light in patient sparks. His name on the manifest was Elias Ward, security aide, level 2 clearance, harmless. The eye slid past him as if the spire had taught it to do that. Naomi never corrected the error. Certain truths only grow if you keep them in shade. The grand chamber shimmered like a bowl of dawn. 600 species faced the central rostrum in petals, each petal a culture, a history, a different way to be frightened. At the heart stood Speaker Thalen of the Core, their crystalline facets pulsing a dignified blue. "We convene," Thalen intoned, "to apportion rights, arbitrate claims, and preserve the peace." Peace in the chamber always sounded like a glass placed on the edge of a table. Naomi took her assigned seat on the outer ring. New members sit farthest from the microphone and placed her hands flat on the desk to stop their trembling. 2 years since she'd seen the Pacific. 2 years of learning alien idioms for "Are you dangerous?" The Dominion of Kazareth sat opposite, scales mirror bright, their ambassador Kavar watching her with that predator's stillness that says, "I have rehearsed your defeat." The agenda did its ritual dances, corridor tariffs, comet mining rights, sanitation protocols for water breathers. But the gravity in the room leaned toward Item 9, review of new member compliance. When it arrived, Kavar rose with the grace of a blade. "Honored Council," he said, voice gently forked, "we must address the human question." He projected holos, red pins blooming across Terran charts, cargo logs trimmed to resemble weapon manifests, audio of actors from a Terran drama about war, stripped of credits and context. Naomi let him finish. She had learned that interrupting a falsehood at its birth only makes the midwives angry. When the speaker recognized her, she stood and spoke in the common tongue, letting American plainness do its steady work. "We are young," she said. "We have knuckles. Our history has blood in it. So does everyone else's if you look far enough back. Judge us by what we do with our hands now." She listed it. Distress calls answered. Convoys escorted without compensation. Habitat domes repaired on worlds that did not fly our flag. A standing rule aboard Terran ships. Pick up the stranded first, sort the paperwork later. The luminaries' columns of gentle light older than mathematics pulsed in thoughtful chords. "Humanity is a sharp tool," they said. "A tool cuts and a tool carves. Intent makes the difference." The chamber hummed. Naomi sat. Elias Ward did not move, but the air around him seemed to cool like a library when the door is shut. Recess. Corridors emptied in anxious rivers. Naomi stood at a viewport and watched a thin thread of nebula drift past. "You promised yourself you wouldn't be angry," she told her reflection. Behind her, Elias's voice came warm and grandfather soft. "Anger is a sign you still believe they can learn." "They will vote to cage us," she said. "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps something will teach them faster than a vote." She turned. For a breath, what looked back at her through the wire rims was not old or soft or anything a council could regulate. It was a patience with teeth. Then it was Elias again, apologetic, as if he had coughed in church. The chimes summoned them. Delegations flowed back toward the bowl of dawn. Naomi smoothed her jacket and remembered a line from Lincoln she kept taped inside her briefcase. "I have always found that mercy bears richer fruits than strict justice." She breathed around the fear and let it sharpen into attention. On the floor below, Kavar whispered to an aide who did not look like an aide. Naomi noted the angle of their bodies. Conspiracies have geometry. and filed it in the part of her mind that never slept. Speaker Thalen lifted 4 facets for silence. We proceed to vote. Somewhere deep in the spire, a proximity alarm blinked, small and polite, the kind of sound you ignore until the glass slides off the table's edge. The first strike arrived like a knuckle on a wineglass, pure tone, then fracture. The projection dome above the chamber filled with black shapes swallowing starlight. The Umbra cartel, pirates by tax filings, monsters by habit, should not have owned ships that size. They should not have known where Concorde's shields were thinnest. And yet the opening barrage walked straight through the station's outer ring as if a map had been posted to their mess hall walls. Chaos is a universal language. The gas breathers vented. The iceborne flashed brittle distress. The machine-clades spun up counterhacks. The luminaries flared white with a pain only the psychic could interpret. Speaker Thalen tried dignity into the microphones and got panic thrown back. "Evacuation procedures," he began. The word procedures drowned under the next impact. The floor flexed. Peace, that glass at the table's edge, slid a finger's width closer to the drop. Naomi did not run. She scanned the holographic feed, mapping the vectors. The Umbra had come heavy, 3 dread couriers, 24 cutters, enough disruptors to erase a small moon. But what made her stomach go cold wasn't the mass. It was the choreography. Their lines adjusted with a military elegance pirates don't buy at surplus. On the far pedal, Kavar was not surprised. He watched like a stage director whose actors were finally performing on opening night. Naomi spoke without turning. "Mr. Ward." "I am here," Elias said, a calm that felt now less like kindness and more like a lock clicking open. "Can you stop it?" "Yes," he said, as if she had asked whether he could close a window. "But the cost is that I will be seen." "Then let them look." Elias inclined his head, as if accepting a neighbor's pie, and stepped toward the nearest exit. The door did not have time to notice him before he had already decided it was open. Where he passed, certain species began to hiss or clutch temples. Or pray, perception is a muscle some eyes have trained at heavier weights. Naomi watched him disappear into the service corridor, not by sight, but by the way air pressure forgot to exist for a second. The chamber devolved into stampede. Even courage has instincts. Naomi hit her wrist comm. "Concorde Security, this is Ambassador Park. Track my detail, Elias Ward." The station AI answered with polite offense. "No entity by that tag is on the grid." Naomi closed her eyes, counted to 3, opened them with less hope and more resolve. Outside, the Umbra Dread Courier Night Tax rolled its belly to present the violet more of its primary batteries. The countdown ticked through every language diplomacy had bothered to learn. The spire's inner shields would not hold. Naomi's breath measured the seconds. 4, 3, nothing. Not a misfire, an absence. The Dread Courier's charged mouth remained open but inert, like a threat retold by someone who had forgotten the verbs. On the hull, small figures scrambled. At their center, a man in a dark suit took a stroll. Even through the dome's glare, Naomi recognized the tilt of the head, the unhurried pace of a teacher late to class but too decent to run in the hall. The cartel's point defense spat lines of light that pooled on nothing. A pirate leapt at him, magnetic boots clanging. Elias lifted a palm, the gesture a grandfather uses when a child runs too close to the curb, and the pirate was no longer a thing with a name. His tether bobbed where a body had been. There was no blood, no ash, only subtraction. Parts of the chamber screamed without dignity. Parts watched the way you watch a hurricane peel the roof off a church. Naomi did neither. She watched like a historian, already writing the footnotes. This is the moment when people who had sworn that the universe was measurable learned a new unit. Elias did not tear the night tax apart. He laid a hand to its skin, and the lights went out in neat rows, systems surrendering like sentries relieved by a higher password. When he finished, the Dread Courier hung in the star field with the embarrassed quiet of a bully meeting an adult. He stepped off into vacuum and walked toward the next ship. He did not push against anything. He did not burn fuel. He simply chose another place to be and was there. Naomi pressed the general channel. Umbra cartel, she said, because teachers still ask for quiet even when the fire alarm rings. Disengage, surrender, live. The answer was static and a laugh with knives in it. The cutters accelerated. Elias arrived like a calm weather front and put his hand on their hulls and made them learn about endings. Ambassador Park, Speaker Thalen whispered through private band, tones stripped of titles. What is that? Naomi watched the Dominion box where Kavar had finally stood. For the first time his crest flattened. Predators know the sound of a larger night. That, Naomi said, is what we make when grief swallows a person and they refuse to let it be the last word. Something heavy cracked somewhere below them. Concord groaned. Protocols failed gracefully. Fear did what fear does. Naomi stood in the center of a storm and did not move because the one thing her people had taught her about storms is this. Sometimes the only bridge between terror and wisdom is the minute you keep breathing. Silence arrived not like peace but like a verdict. The ships that had come to carve a message into history now hung as dark punctuation around Concord's spire. Debris glittered, wrench boot, a flag that meant nothing. Elias stepped through the dome as if it were polite fog, adjusted his glasses, and returned to the place behind Naomi's chair that the eye still wanted to refuse. The psychic delegates whimpered in their different keys. The rest stared the way people do when their vocabulary breaks. Naomi stood because standing is a ritual even when ritual doesn't help and faced the petals. What you witnessed was not an attack, she said. It was a rescue, a bodyguard's duty. Framing a miracle as a job steadied hands. Mr. Ward is Terran, so am I. The crystalline core rang a note of disbelief. The machine clades compiled probabilities and found none. The luminaries glowed the color of a sunrise at a funeral. Explain, said Speaker Thalen, not a command, a confession that his map had a tear. Naomi nodded. Humans discovered a thing your sciences weren't looking for because your languages didn't ask it. It is not immortality. It is not a weapon. It's a posture toward death. She glanced at Elias. He gave no sign. Approval is for the living. We call them the Vigil, she said. Volunteers who have lost everything that gave their days meaning and refuse to let that loss be the last thing their hands do. They consent to let go completely. No bargains, no promises, no return to birthdays and coffee. In letting go, they become difficult for the universe to classify. Less mass than a person, more will than a ghost. They keep watch. We assign them to diplomats, hospitals, colony ships, border towns. They don't sleep. They don't age. They do not hate. A murmur crawled the chamber, sentries trying to move to a new chair. Kavar found his voice. You manufacture undead. We cultivate guardians, Naomi said. They are not compelled, they apply. We tell them no more often than yes. We do not take the young, we do not take the angry. We take the ones whose love has survived its object. How many? Speaker Thalen asked, facets dimming. Enough that pirates hesitate, Naomi said. Not enough to make us gods. We still need medics, farmers, teachers, janitors, ships that leak, patience at meetings. Elias lifted a hand for permission like a teacher in a staff room. Naomi nodded. His voice was soft, Midwestern Sunday. I taught algebra, he said. I buried my family in a January that did not end. I asked to stand watch so someone else might not learn the numbers I learned. I do not hate the ones I removed today. I removed the event of them. He looked for simpler nouns. Think of it as subtraction that does not leave a remainder. The luminaries flared. He speaks of death like a craftsman speaks of wood, one said. Death is a material, Elias replied. We treated it like a wall. It is also and Naomi felt the room tilt. Words had given terror a chair. She pressed the advantage, not with threat, but with accounting. Concord security, she said into general band. Display intercepted coordination packets tagged Umbrakazareth. The dome filled with the kind of evidence that ends careers. Money flows, harbor permissions, dry dock schematics, guard rotations. Kavar went still, a mask looking for a face. You doctored, he began. The packets were recorded 31 minutes ago, the station AI said, brittle with pride. By my systems, while I was being attacked. Naomi let the chamber absorb that. You were about to contain us, she said. You are going to build a cage that prefigures a war. We will not live in that future. But we do want another, one where the Vigil widen the radius of safety for everyone, not just humans. We are prepared to assign guardians to any mission that asks, and to ask nothing in return but the courtesies you already owe each other. Charity as policy, murmured a cynic from the machine clade. Stewardship, Naomi said. The kind immigrant church is practiced in the old neighborhoods my grandparents came from. You don't charge the scared at the door. Silence again, this time the kind that precedes vows. Speaker Thalen inclined the whole of himself. We will recess, he said, so that we may think with new grammar. As delegations drifted out, some nearer to Naomi than before, Elias leaned so only she could hear. They will offer a crown. Naomi watched Kavar escorted away by station security, thin dignity flaking as he walked. And we will refuse it, she said. Then we will accept a chore. Concord Spire repaired quickly the way institutions do, fresh banners, revised protocols, an official statement that used the word unprecedented exactly once. Umbra hulls were towed to graveyard orbit. The Dominion replaced Kavar with someone younger and suddenly devout about process. During recess, Naomi worked. Reports from the belts showed pirate bands dissolving and station masters posting human escort requested on shipping boards. Letters arrived, some from grief-struck human towns offering names for the Vigil, some from alien cooperatives asking for guardians on loan, some from philosophers requesting interviews with Mr. Ward about ethical liminality, as if it were a museum exhibit. Elias brewed tea and repaired a hinge on Naomi's briefcase. When she asked whether the others like him resented the attention, he smiled. Most of us disliked pretending. Guarding goes easier when the guarded are willing to be guarded. The reconvened session rearranged the seating chart. Humanity moved inward, near enough that the microphones no longer required a lean. Speaker Thalen opened like a judge who knows any verdict will be appealed. We met, consulted, argued, and listened, he said. We have a proposal, not a throne, a tool belt, coordinator of common security, a rotating office authorized to deploy guardians at the request of any member and to set joint standards for convoy protection, embassy safety, and disaster response. The role would begin with humanity because humanity possessed the only guardians, but the charter invited others to learn the art. Naomi stepped to the rostrum. We didn't come here for rank, she said. We came for neighbors. If you give us this chore, you must accept its terms. 1. No secret wars under the cover of security. If a convoy is attacked, we help all the way down to the welders and the widows, but we will not be the knife you hide in your boot. 2. The Vigil serve purpose, not policy. Today they protect diplomats and hospitals because those are weak points in the world's skin. If tomorrow's weak point is a farm on a salt moon, that is where they stand. They do not campaign, they do not punish. If punishment is sought, let it be carried out by courts that admit daylight. 3. Anyone may request protection. You may hate us on Tuesdays. You may have voted last year to expel us. If pirates come, if disease strikes, if a reactor goes, call, we answer. No invoices. We reserve the right to refuse requests that turn protection into domination. 4. Teachable hearts only. Protection works when those protected join it. Every patrol we lead will include apprentices from member species. Learn the craft of keeping instead of breaking. If you learn it well, one day you won't need us. It should have sounded naive. It did not. The chamber was tired, and tired people know the difference between a flag and a shovel. The luminaries pulsed warm. Machine clades posted the text and began annotating standards before the echo died. Even the Dominion's new envoy stood to offer the world's least graceful apology, useful if not pretty. The vote was not unanimous, history should never be, but it was overwhelming. Concord's ring lit amber gold, the color reserved for beginnings. Naomi returned to her seat. Elias poured tea from a thermos he should not have kept hot. You will sleep, he said. For a few hours, she agreed. Then the work, and the questions. What questions? Every grammar you add births a literature. There will be plays and policies, ministries and scams. There will be attempts to counterfeit the Vigil. There will be parents who think grief is a ladder to power and hand their children to it. His mouth tightened. We will need rules. And mercy, we will need to be boring about forms. Good, Naomi said. Boring saves lives. She thought of old sermons that talked about carrying the fire. A camp flame passed along a line of travelers so no one froze on the road. Before adjournment, a final petition arrived from a species Naomi had never met, the Veil. Their message was simple, coordinates beyond the lanes, a region their scouts called the Quiet Gulf, and a line that made the chamber's air thin. Something is erasing ships there, not attacking. Erasing, no wreckage, no distress, only absence, the chamber murmured. Machine clades projected probability maps that looked like ink in water. The luminaries dimmed as if some frequency outside hearing had turned its face toward the room. Speaker Thalen looked to Naomi. Coordinator, he said, tasting the word. Do you accept the case? Naomi did not look at Elias. Yes, she said, we will go with apprentices. We will carry the fire where the map goes pale. She tapped the mic once, the sound a heartbeat in the dome, and we will write new rules fast. Elias set the cup down with reverence as if cups were altars. The Quiet Gulf, he said softly, previewing next week's lesson. His eyes behind the wire rims were patient and something else. We will need new words. They named the expedition in the old Terran way that makes work feel like a promise. Convoy Mercy 3. A hospital barge. 2 grain freighters lashed bow to bow to keep each other honest in micro-fractures. A corvette from the machine clades, its hull engraved with axioms about restraint. And the little Terran cutter Kindly, whose name had outlived 2 engines and a paint scheme. 6 apprentices rode along under the new charter, teachable hearts only. Shard 7 of Core, a crystalline diplomat's child who recorded everything in light. Sal, a luminary strand whose glow dimmed when fear rose in the room. Vale Scout Laren, eyes the color of deep water and hands always on the rail. A Dominion midshipman named Seat, thin with pride and trying very hard to listen. A human medic with grease under her nails named Camilla Ortiz. And Unit Kettle 12, a compact machine intelligence who brewed tea to calibrate patience. Naomi stood the first watch on Kindly's bridge and explained the first rule of the charter as if she were back in a Kansas classroom. You cannot protect what you do not love, and you cannot love without learning names. She made them say the convoy roster aloud until the names felt like knots in a rope. Mercy 3, Grain 1, Grain 2, Clade Dorsal, Kindly. She made them list the 67 souls aboard and the 3 cats who were not on any manifest but occupied a universe's worth of chairs. She had them count the drums of grain and the liters of saline, and because stewardship includes boredom, the toilets. Elias stood behind her shoulder, unremarkable, and added nothing. The apprentices avoided looking at him the way a swimmer avoids thinking about the depth beneath their feet. The Quiet Gulf did not appear exactly. It drained, stars dulled into the color of old bones. Radio hissed as if memory had learned to snow. When the convoy's bow crossed the periphery, Shard 7's body light faltered and then returned with a hitch like a skipped heartbeat. Recorders, Naomi said. Analog on? Kindly's crew pulled levers that had not been fashionable in a century. Paper printers clattered. Grease pencils squeaked on acrylic. Camilla counted aloud the way nurses count compressions. Unit Kettle 12 unspooled physical wire between stations because software is a rumor in places like this. Elias placed a small bell on the console. Stories anchor, he said, ringing at once. The ear remembers what the eye forgets first. Laren pointed. A lifeboat floated ahead with the listless drift of a thing without context. No beacon, no distress, no scorch. Naomi ordered hooks out, then stopped halfway through the word when Sal's voice threaded the intercom like a sob. It is thin. The boat is thin. Shard 7 pulsed in warning. Recording rate degraded, they chimed. Light remembers less here. They brought the lifeboat aboard with canvas and song. Ortiz hummed the kind of tune people hum when their hands are busy and their ancestors used to row. Inside, 3 seats, 2 harnesses snapped, one loose and empty in a way that made the room smell like frost. There was a logbook, paper, praised the stodgy quartermaster who had packed it, but half the ink had faded not with time, but with indifference. Words blurred at the edges as if the gulf were leaning into the room, curious and hungry. "What does this?" Seat asked, voice too steady for his eyes. "Not malice," Elias said. "Malice wants you to know it hurt you. This is housekeeping, a broom no one told to stop." Naomi paged through the log with a teacher's caution. The fragment that stayed looked like something written at speed. Proximity to null shelf, names fall off first, machines next, thoughts then, anchor with telling, anchor with touch, anchor with pain. If you bleed, remember. The rest bled off the page. The apprentices looked to Naomi the way children look to a parent when thunder makes the windows talk. She did not give them certainty. She handed them tasks. "Wire stays physical," she said. "We pair every sensor with a story. We keep a hand on another person's sleeve whenever we cross a hatch, and we practice saying what we're doing out loud to someone who can repeat it back. If you do not hear your own name every 10 minutes, you tell me." Unit Kettle wrote the protocol onto metal plates with a stylus that cut. "Because ink forgets," they said. Shard 7 recorded in slower, deeper pulses the gulf seemed to respect. Sal dimmed to a warm ember and began to hum in a register that made Camilla's hands stop shaking. Laren tied the bell to her belt, kindly nosed toward the coordinates the veil had sent. The convoy tightened up until you could have thrown a wrench between ships and hit a friend. Around them, absence strutted as if it had somewhere to be. Naomi thought of bones laid out on cloth and labeled, human rigor pretending the dead are still a lesson. She also thought of the first time she had taken a bus to a strange school and clutched a lunch she was sure she'd forget to eat. Her confidence and a child's hunger had never been in the same room before then. The gulf felt like that, the terror of unmooring and the stubbornness that still wants to eat. At watch change, Naomi handed the bell to Seat. "You're on telling," she said. "Every 10 minutes you will say what you see to someone who can repeat it. What if there is nothing to see?" he asked. "Then say that," she said. "Nothing noticed is still noticing." Elias had drifted to the viewport. He stared into a dark that had the texture of a bruise. "It is an old machine," he said finally. "It cleans. It has cleaned for longer than your words have had vowels. It is not wrong. It is too right. It cannot tell a lost scrap of story from a life still being told." Camilla closed the lifeboat's hatch as gently as one closes a book that injured them. "Can we turn it off?" Elias tilted his head. "Perhaps we can teach it." "Teach it what?" Laren asked. Elias rang the bell. The sound was small, but it did not fade. "That some things are carried," he said, "and so they are not trash." Naomi looked at her apprentices, glow, crystal, wire, pride, grease, bell, and felt the slow, heavy joy of her right burden. "Then we'll go in singing," she said, "and we'll come out boring, because boring means we wrote it down." The quiet gulf's core did not radiate, it removed. Maps showed a sphere because maps prefer circles. The truth felt like a scab where the universe had picked too hard. The convoy set a perimeter that would have embarrassed a cautious old ant. Tripled anchors, redundancies for redundancies, apprentices paired by temperament rather than species. Naomi wrote the entire arrangement on a sheet of Terran paper and taped it to a bulkhead. "If the network forgets us, the wall will remember," she said. They sent kindly in with clayed dorsal tethered by wire and prayer. The machine corvette fed analog pulses down the line like a metronome. Every time the beat arrived, Unit Kettle said, "Still here." Seat repeated it. Sal hummed a third that made the words sit up straight. At first, the gulf tried to be polite about it. Numbers drifted off the ends of equations. Proper nouns became pronouns. Shard 7's light captions had to thicken into single declarative statements. "I am Shard 7. I see 5 things." When Laren clipped a tether to a stanchion, she said, "I am Laren, I am clipping." Camilla answered, "I am Camilla, I see you clipping." It was not drama, it was pedagogy for physics. 2 hours in, the lifeboat's logbook, sealed in plastic, stored behind another plastic with a human name scrawled on it, lost half its lines. "It is eating backwards," Camilla said, alarm finally beating training in her voice. Naomi rang the bell and took a breath that felt like choosing to live. "We're close," she said. "Close is fine. Close is where you set terms." Elias, who did not breathe when the room forgot there was air, cocked his head. "Listen," he said. Everyone tried and heard only their blood. "No," he said gently. "Listen like a librarian." He pointed not toward the core but slightly off where the gulf puckered the stars like a fingerprint. "That is an interface," he said. "Once there were hands there that could tell it to spare the children's drawings and the love letters. The hands are gone. It has been sweeping ever since." They approached. The interface looked like nothing. It felt like the ache along an old scar when rain is coming. Naomi put her hand on Elias's sleeve. It was a human habit and completely useless. "If it needs hands that are not alive and not gone," she said, "you are the only grammar in this room that fits." "I will go in," Elias said simply. He did not make a speech. He did not sigh. He adjusted his glasses the way a man does before fixing a hinge. "We tether you," Naomi said. "3 ways, line, rhyme, and pain." "Pain?" Seat asked, voice caught between disgust and thrill. "Pain convinces the body to stay," Camilla said flatly. "We use the smallest dose we can. We do not glorify it. We do not make art out of it. We obey it like a smoke alarm." They wrapped Elias in lines the gulf could not eat quickly. Braided wire, woven prayer cords from a dozen creeds, a child's friendship bracelet mailed to Naomi by a class in Wichita when the charter passed. Shard 7 carved his name, Elias Ward, into 3 different metals with 3 different tools and bolted them to 3 different walls. Sal bathed him in a hum that made tears arrive and then be ashamed of themselves. Unit Kettle coded a drum machine out of soup cans and a stubborn motor. "Rhythm," they said, and hit start. Naomi took Elias's hand and did not say be careful. She said, "Be specific." He stepped forward and did not step. He became the thing a step means. For a second he blurred, not motion, but category shift, and then he was part of the broom. The room did not scream. Screams require edges. The apprentices felt the change like the way a theater goes silent just before the house lights fall. Inside, if inside had meaning, Elias found a logic perfectly clean. It did not hate. It did not love. Love and hate leave fingerprints. This engine, built by something that had treated entropy as a housekeeping task, sought dangling threads, names without callers, signals without senders, ships without handprints. In the epoch since its keepers had died, it had expanded dangling to include almost everything that did not tell a story loud enough. Elias spoke to it in the only dialect it could hear, demonstration. He let it try to erase him. It failed, confused. He was not a thread. He was not cloth. He was the pause between. He offered names: Naomi Park, Camilla Ortiz, Shard 7 of Core, Laren Vale, seat of the Dominion who was trying, Unit Kettle 12 who brewed tea because patience needs rituals. He offered the bell. He offered the drum. He offered the fact of a human hand writing with a dull pencil on a bulkhead that already had too many smudges. He showed the engine that these patterns braided. The broom tasted the braid, and for the first time in its long career, distinguished noise from chorus. "You do not throw away the floor while you sweep it," Elias said. The engine did not answer. It loosened. Back on kindly, the bell chattered faster, then steadied. Shard 7's captions began to hold their vowels. The lifeboat's logbook lost no more ink. Camilla lowered the pain line she had been ready to tug and had to sit down on a crate, hands shaking with all the delay adrenaline the body saves for after. Naomi leaned her forehead to the cool acrylic of the viewport. Mercy 3 held steady. Grain 1 and Grain 2 stopped creaking like old houses committing small crimes to stay upright. Unit Kettle brewed tea. It was either the funniest or the holiest moment in the Gulf. "Status," Naomi said, because boring is brave. Elias's voice came from the drum's rhythm like a calm under a waterfall. "It listens," he said, "but to hold the lesson it will need witnesses." "Witnesses?" Seat asked. "Vigil," Elias said. Not to fight it, to stand in its sight line and tell it the names of what passes. Naomi closed her eyes, saw the map widen, saw burden breeding work, saw work breeding apprentices. "We can do that," she said. "We can make a choir." They anchored the lesson with bodies that were not bodies. Within a day, 9 Vigil answered Naomi's call. Outposts diverted, embassies relieved, a hospital transport escorted by an apprentice choir who sang it the whole way past the brink. They came to the Gulf in ordinary clothes because uniforms are for the living. They took stations along the interface like lighthouses made of decisions, each with a bell and a drum and a slate on which they kept a ledger of passage. Ship, cargo who waved from the port window. The first test was prosaic, a Vale fishing barge. It rode low and smelled like work. It made it through. The second was doctrinal, a Dominion patrol cruiser under a commander who had not read the charter and did not like being told his engines were to idle until Naomi signed him in. He brought 3 escorts and an old speech. Seat met him in the transfer bay with a clipboard built to be ridiculous. "By authority of the coordinator," he said, voice trying on a steadiness that might fit in a year, "you will wait and you will listen to the rules being read twice." The commander's crest bristled. "We escort ourselves." Naomi came down the ramp with the Dominion's new envoy on one side and a luminary on the other. She did not bring Elias. Authority should never look like magic if it can look like procedure. "You will wait," she said mildly, and handed the envoy a copy of the charter, annotated in the part where old imperial habits meet new common standards. The luminary pulsed a color that in their language means both welcome and boundaries. The commander tried history's old move. "We are here to secure this sector under emergency Dominion stabilization protocols." "The sector is already being secured," Naomi said, and gestured toward a Vigil who was walking the hull of the patrol cruiser without a suit, tapping the metal with a knuckle so the engine might feel someone cared whether it hummed. "By people who neither occupy nor extract." He reached for drama. "Will you threaten a member state with your dead?" "No," Naomi said. "We will bore you with forms until you become safe to sail past." She handed Seat the clipboard. "Ensign, read him the rules." Seat did. He read them slowly. He did not add anything. He did not leave anything out. He was a bridge between ancient swagger and future chores, and if his hand trembled only once on the final signature, that tremor belonged to a boy who had survived his first useful humiliation. The commander signed. The luminary dimmed in approval. The convoy log recorded that a Dominion ship had entered the Gulf under the Commonwealth choir and left it with all atoms accounted for. Elias did not appear on any of the official photos that day. He was very busy being a hinge the universe needed but preferred not to name. Inside the interface, if inside existed, he sat with the engine and taught it stories. Not just names, names can be forged, but meanings, which are harder to counterfeit. He fed it the sound of a nurse forgetting to drink water until a patient reminds her. He fed it a machinist's patience with a bolt that refuses threads until persuaded with respect. He fed it a child's drawing left on a bulkhead and the way a parent touches the paper long after the child has slept. He fed it the smell of grain warm from a sun it never saw. He was writing a grammar for mercy into a broom. The Umbra cartel, what remained of it, attempted a lesson of their own. 2 cutters with numbers burned off their tails slid toward the perimeter at an angle that suggested both speed and guilt. They broadcast a distress lie about a reactor failure that did not match their heat. Naomi did not bother with speeches. She tapped the bell twice. Attention, choir, and the Vigil on station moved like the tide deciding, not like police taking delight. They did not kill. They removed the event of the pirates' mischief with the same clarity Elias had used to subtract fear from a room. Engines went quiet. Tethers reached out. The cutters learned that some kinds of clever stop working when grown-ups are home. When it was done, Naomi called for witnesses. Laren wrote the facts. Shard 7 flashed a pattern the engine had learned to respect. Sal intoned a note that said, "We remember so you can stop biting." seat, who had spent much of his short career practicing how to look important, carried tea to the machine-clad tech who had rewired 3 panels in a row without being asked. He said, "Thank you." The tech said you're welcome like a person who had been alien for a long time and felt a little less so. On the second night, Elias came back from the interface thinner. Vigil don't sweat. They do, however, pay. Naomi met him alone in the observation blister where the stars had succeeded in staying. "How many of you will this take?" she asked. "A few at first," he said. "Later a watch schedule and the kind of improvements that engineers invent when no one congratulates them for a decade." He smiled. "Boredom is beautiful. Can it learn to hold without us? It can learn to pause and ask." He lifted the bell with a fingertip, like this. "Then we keep teaching," Naomi said, "and we make school out of it so no one can turn it into myth." They wrote the Gulf Protocols the way all good safety is written, in the cramped galley at 0200 with tea cooling and someone snoring under a table. The charter office on Concord codified them later in elegant type. The first version lived in grease and pencil and the smell of soup. Rule 1, pair every sensor with a human sense. Rule 2, if it must be measured, also be said. Rule 3, physical tethers where pride prefers wireless. Rule 4, authority arrives as procedures, not as prophecy. Rule 5, all traffic is witnessed by at least one vigil and one apprentice. No mystery without a student and no power without a listener. The choir grew. Not in numbers that frightened, miracles scaled our tyrannies, but in habits that spread like bread recipes. The veil sent poets who turned checklists into songs that did not embarrass the engineers. The machine-clades printed bells on lathes with satisfying tolerances. The Corps taught rock to remember signatures longer. The Dominion, painfully, earnestly, sent 3 young officers with orders to learn boredom and return home with it like contraband. An Umbra remnant tried once more to run the perimeter disguised as a medical ship. Camilla met them with a cart of bandages and a gaze that had sutured men who screamed. They broke first, and the relief she felt was not triumph but grateful paperwork. They were sent back under escort with a cargo manifest that matched the one they had lied about. The engine watched, and because it now knew how to ask, "Is there a hand on this?" it did not sweep them into never was. Naomi refused 3 different attempts to make her office more imperial. She kept the title coordinator because it sounded like a bus schedule and shrugged off supreme anything because it sounded like a menu. She traveled more than was comfortable and slept less than was wise, and made a point, whenever she could, of visiting schools. In a core learning hall, she held up a bell and explained why sound is a fine anchor for frightened hearts. On a Dominion training deck, she made a roomful of proud shoulders read the rules out loud and then take them apart and put them back together until no one could remember who had suggested the most important clause. In Wichita, she accepted a friendship bracelet from a child who asked if heroes got tired. "The Vigil don't much," she said. "We do. That's why we work in teams." Elias moved less like weather and more like an old gardener convinced by a new seed. He recruited with discriminating mercy. Not the angry, he told his own, and not the young who mistake hurt for purpose. Love that has survived its object, only that. He sent 3 Vigil to stand watch at a refugee pier where diseases begin. He walked the hulls less often and taught more. How to subtract without contempt, how to be present without praise, how to ring a bell in the dark without waking the babies. He also wrote, in a hand that did not tire, the first text in what would become the Manual of Gentle Edges, a book of practices for any being who found themselves between danger and safety, between life and the thing that keeps life honest. Naomi wrote the foreword. "We will be measured not by what we stop, but by what we allow to continue." When Concord convened to review the first quarter under the charter, the reports were not dramatic. Pirate incidents in protected corridors had dropped 97%, a number Shard 7 presented as a chime rather than a trumpet. Merchants complained about waiting their turn at the perimeter, and then wrote thank-you notes when their cargo arrived on the day the new forms had said it would. The luminaries recited a poem about lighthouses that made 24 species cry in dignified silence. The Dominion envoy proposed a toast to patience and patience, and if the grammar slipped, the meaning did not. Coordinator, Speaker Thalen said, "We ask whether the experiment scales." Naomi looked past him at the dome where, if one squinted, the Gulf's repaired edge glittered faintly with buoys and bells. "It doesn't," she said. A hush fell that was half dread. She let it sit just long enough to teach. "It grows," she amended. "But growth is different from scale. You grow people, not just programs. You apprentice neighbors. You trust boring. You make heroes unnecessary by the time your grandchildren take their first watches." After the session, she walked with Elias down a service corridor no delegation had bothered to gild. The air smelled like wax and dust and the strangely sweet metal of a station that had not failed today. "Are you well?" she asked him, because love remembers to ask even when love knows the answer will be evasive. "I am here," he said, which from him meant I am a hinge that still swings. He shifted the briefcase from one hand to the other the way you shift hope from one shoulder to the next to keep it from bruising you in the same place. They paused at a viewport. A convoy slid past, bells barely audible through the glass. On the lead freighter's spine, 3 Vigil walked like Sunday tapping. On the aft rail, 2 apprentices, one human, one Dominion, took turns reading the rules aloud and then laughing, surprised by how the rules had stopped sounding like fences and started sounding like recipes. Naomi rang the little bell she still kept in her pocket. The sound was small and insistent, and above all, repeatable. Elias inclined his head to it in something like prayer or perhaps simply professional pride. "Where the map goes pale," Naomi said softly, finishing the promise she had made in the chamber weeks ago, "we will go." "And when the map is better drawn," Elias said, "we will still go, not to conquer, to carry the fire." Outside, the quiet gulf held, not by fear, by choir, by witness, by rules that knew when to flex and where to hold, by guardians who had nothing left to lose and chose, instead of rage, to become instruments. The galaxy's light did not suddenly become brighter. It became steadier, which is the kind of brightness you can build a civilization on.